The Angie's List you know and trust is now Angie, and we're so much more than just a list. We still connect you with top local pros and show you ratings and reviews, but now we also let you compare upfront prices on hundreds of projects and book a service instantly. We can even handle the rest of your project from start to finish. So remember, Angie's List is now Angie, and we're here to get your job done right. Get started at Angie.com. That's ANGI, or download the app today.
Hello, welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Andy Cleff, and I'm pleased to welcome Andy Flemming to our show. Welcome, sir.
Delighted to be with you, Andy. Looking forward to the conversation.
This is the Andy and Andy show. We had one a couple of weeks ago with Jeff and Jeff. So Andy's CEO and founding principal at an organization called Way to Grow, also a co-author of An Everyone Culture, Becoming a Deliberately Developmental Organization. And that's a mouthful, and we're going to unpack that. I'm going to save my tongue and call it a DDO, Deliberately Developmental Organizations. These are, I would just love to read, I loved reading the book and learning about these kinds of organizations that I think, unfortunately, are unusual, ones that tolerate, even prefer, making one's failures, risks, weaknesses visible, public, so that colleagues can really support each other. The opposite of that, so many are familiar with, the Tayloristic version, where everybody is doing, as the book says, a second job of hiding their weaknesses, trying to look their best, manage their impressions. Some of our listeners will be familiar with our previous podcast, Red is Good, where we talked about that concept of delivering watermelons, where it's nice and green on the outside, and when you crack it open, it's red on the inside. So listeners, imagine creating a workplace safe enough and demanding enough that everybody comes out of hiding. That's the promise of a DDO, and that's going to be the focus of our show. Before we dive in, Andy, tell us a little bit about your background, a little bit about Way to Grow's vision.
Sure. So I've been in the organizational development, leadership development field for about 30 years, and both inside of companies and also, but mostly as a consultant and executive coach, and have written a couple of books on life and career choices, and then collaborated with my colleagues for An Everyone Culture. Education-wise, I'm reminded of a story. The coach was told by a player at toward the end of the season. He said, "Coach, I haven't missed a practice all year," expecting the coach to say, something nice and flowery. And the coach reply was, "Well, you should be a lot further along than you are now." And so Andy, I went to Yale undergraduate and then Harvard Business School, and I've had the privilege of working with current colleagues Bob Keegan, Lisa Leahy, as well as Claire Lee, who's also a developmental coach and happens to be my spouse. I have worked with some others in the field of human development and organizational development. Some both luminaries as well as some folks who aren't widely known, but probably should be. So I've been sort of chasing after this big idea that has crystallized with our book An Everyone Culture, chasing after it for a long time. And the idea is that you can create organizations, and in fact, we found some, and they do exist, where everyone grows. Where in the course of being a part of the organization, they can become and are expected to become better and fuller versions of themselves. And so our vision is to help stimulate the creation of, help further the creation of 1 million DDOs in the world. So that anybody who is looking to go to work in an organization that is not only successful from a business standpoint, but is also going to help them grow and help them move toward their full potential, can find one. And that's a personal thing for me in having two kids who are in their mid-teens and wanting them to be able to find organizations, work organizations, and heck, schools and other kinds of institutions that operate this way.
We embrace them for how they are. The entire, part of the book talks about bringing our whole self to work.
That's right.
And I think we want that for our kids, we want that for our colleagues, and we want it for ourselves.
Absolutely.
So I want to start because the title seems so simple, yet it is so rich. And you touched on a little bit. We talk, everyone culture. I want to talk about what do we mean by everybody? Is it just the underlings or just the leaders?
No, it's both, as Andy. If you think about our paradigm that sort of began to emerge in the late 20th century for growing people at work. The paradigm that emerged was that the best thing to do was to identify a small percentage of your workforce who you would consider to be the quote unquote high potentials.
Right, became part of the succession plan.
That's right. And it's kind of still for most companies or many companies, it's kind of the dominant paradigm. It's really sort of the talent management playbook, if you will, is to identify the high potentials and then create some special events, workshops, executive coaching, even some special experiences that exist outside of the regular flow of work. That are kind of extras or add-ons. And what we began to see and then did a deep dive into in our book is that there's what we would call now a 21st century paradigm that takes on the question of who you're going to develop. It says not just high potentials, you're going to develop everyone.
At every level.
At every level. And so it includes the C-suite and it includes frontline folks and everybody in between. So that's what we mean by everyone.
The next part, culture. So we all embrace a healthy culture as agilists. We talk about culture, eat strategy for breakfast. A good, healthy culture increases everything: employee retention, profitability, better communication. It reduces cost structures. What are some of the other things that you guys stress with this concept of a healthy culture? So
from our perspective, healthy culture has all of the things that you just mentioned, that it employee retention, profitability, greater frankness in communication, all those kinds of things. And it's also what we call a growth culture, that the culture fosters the development of every person in it. And that kind of baked into the culture itself is an expectation that people are going to stretch and grow, and that the people, when they come to work in that organization, can come into the organization knowing and expecting that they're going to be both challenged and supported as far as their own growth. And when you have a culture where people are stretching and growing, then you've got a culture that's better able to handle adaptive challenges that are the kind of challenges, that organizations are facing, more and more, the more complex, ambiguous kind of problems that people who are have kind of a growth mindset, if you will. And from our perspective, a growth culture is how you scale Carol Dweck's growth mindset idea. But people coming into such an organization, both individually and collectively, are going to be better equipped and in fact going to look forward to taking on the more complex problems and challenges. They're going to see that as part of their own growth journey as opposed to, oh God, here's one more thing, the next thing that we've got to handle or somehow deal with. So hope that gives a little bit of a sense of what we mean by an everyone culture. From our perspective, an everyone culture is really a growth culture.
And it also begins to touch on deliberate and development. So you talk about it is an expectation of everyone. It is upfront. It's known when you join this sort of team, this sort of culture. It's no surprise. It's a deliberate choice by policy, by practice, by principles, by value. And you also talked about development, not of a select few and not of just a career. Let's unpack the DDO part of it.
Right. So deliberately is what we like to say is what takes someone's growth from what we would call happy accidents to something that happens much more intentionally, much more purposefully. Let me pack the unhappy accident idea for just a second. So we've done this with thousands of folks in workshops, if you were to ask someone to talk about a time in their career that, a 2-month period, a 6-month period, that for whatever reason was a particularly growthful, a time of high growth for them. Most everybody can come up with something after just a little bit of reflection. They can think about the project, that they got put on unexpectedly, or an opportunity that came their way because somebody left and they were next in line, or they had somebody who believed in them and gave them a chance to do something that they'd never done before. Those kinds of experiences. And so everybody has those kind of stories. And if you unpack it a little bit, you see, my goodness, those were times when I really grew. And that growth that I experienced during that time, man, that enabled me to do things in my career and in my life that I wouldn't have been otherwise able to do. Thank goodness I had that experience. Well, But for most of us, in fact, almost all of us, those experiences are things that just kind of happened. We just sort of fell into it. But if you unpack it a little bit, you can see that there's common circumstances and common factors that enable growth experiences. And they have to do, and primarily speaking, with higher levels of challenge. So an opportunity to step outside of your comfort zone and what it is that you've done so far, or what it is that you might consider your particular strength, and also higher levels of support, that you at least had one person or maybe a group of people who believed in you, supported you, encouraged you, held your hand at some points. And so since we know that higher levels of challenge and support are what enable growth, the DDOs, the deliberate part of DDOs says, well, why don't we go beyond happy accidents for people? Why don't we try to create an organizational environment where people experience higher levels of challenge and support every day?
So a light bulb just went off for me. So I'm reading some of the examples in the book, and I forget which of the 3 organizations did this so regularly. But the concept was, as soon as you've got your job down and you're comfortable, you're being moved on. And I thought, damn, shit, I just figured this out. Don't move me now. Give me 6 months. But you don't get that. And now, so your explanation here of the value of the happy accident, make it deliberate. Put the individual, and all of us are highly capable, or we wouldn't take on these challenges. Put the individual in a situation where that, quote, happy accident happens more frequently, because you're forced to the growth edge, you're supported, and then greater things happen. Now I understand why they do that.
Yeah, exactly right. And the idea is that you not only want to stretch individuals, but you want individuals to be part of a unit, or as some of the companies call them, a container, that itself is being stretched. So the idea is that you want to have folks be part of a team that when sort of the goal emerges for that team for the coming year, there's a moment where they look at each other and say, wow, we have no idea how we're going to achieve that goal. We're going to have to rethink everything. And a DDO wants to have those kind of conversations happening. It wants to have people questioning the way they've done things before, and questioning, even more importantly, the old assumptions that underlie the way that they've done things before, both collectively in terms of a team or a unit or a whole organization, but also individually. And that actually leads, we didn't exactly plan it this way, Andy, but that actually leads to the notion of what the heck do we mean by development?
Right.
And what we mean by development, kind of our sort of, I'll call it a semi-formal definition of development, is surfacing, so bringing to the surface, engaging or testing, and then ultimately transcending limiting assumptions and the behavioral patterns associated with them. So by limiting assumptions, we just mean old ways of thinking, old assumptions that we might have unconsciously made about ourselves, about other people, about customers, markets.
About everything.
About everything.
It's moving to the left side of the Connecticut framework, where best practices don't exist, and you let go of what you think really worked, and you have to let go of so many cognitive biases and go explore. Now, I'm sitting here thinking, what kind of organization can take this? And classical, hierarchical, Tayloristic, let's stack rank everybody, this shit's not going to fly. So it takes a much different mindset and organizational approach to even begin to think of this.
Yeah, it does. And it's interesting, though, the three that we profile in the book, all very different kinds of organizations. But they didn't start out necessarily to create what we came to label a DDO. And it was only, it's kind of our labeling of them as DDOs is a recent phenomenon. They were actually trying to figure out the best way to run their business. And they independently came to the conclusion that the best way to run their business was by stimulating the growth and development of everybody who works in the business.
Right.
And so it doesn't, you don't have to be a kind of organizational development or psychological kind of savant to be interested in this. That it's often kind of the, quote unquote, hard-headed business people. Once you help them sort of get a hold of the concept, that they actually become the biggest converts to this idea because they see results.
And the other piece that always fascinates me is none of these organizations really knew what the other ones were doing. It's similar to, what Brian Robertson found when he was looking at some of the institutions, and Frederick Laloux and all these people, they did these research, and there's these common principles underlying these things that produce these vastly different organizational structures and performances and industries, yet there's some common ground.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And that was part of the fun for us in doing the research and writing the book, was to see underlying these companies were common principles and kind of common dimensions that we label in the book as